data everywhere, but what's an analyst to think? These days, there's really no excuse to not use data. The engines for getting data where and when it's needed are faster and more versatile than ever. Find out what that all means on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yes, indeed, yours truly, Eric Kavanagh here with a team of salty veterans, folks. I've got some of my old pals on the line today. We're going to talk about one of the hottest topics that will never not be a hot topic, I have to tell you, but it's amazingly hot right now. Everything is hot in technology in the data space. I was musing to myself before the show, even the backup and restore space is hot right now, okay? Talk about the sleepiest space in the industry. Backup and restore is rocking and rolling. We'll have a show on that in a few weeks, probably on Inside Analysis or DM Radio. But today's topic is all about integration at scale. So just some quick history, folks. I've been doing this, like I said, for over 13 years now. And before that, I worked for the Data Warehousing Institute and kind of dragged them kicking and screaming into the webinar world. And I learned a whole lot about data warehousing and business intelligence and all these different technologies. And one of the things that would jump into my head all the time back in 2008 and 2009 was, when is the ETL madness going to stop? So just as a reference to our audience, ETL stands for extract, transform, load. It's how you pull data from one system, transform it into a suitable format, and load it into another system. We did that 25, 30 years ago so much because we realized you couldn't query operational systems like your SAP or your Oracle. The systems that actually run your business, they weren't designed for analytics. They were designed primarily to get the job done, to do the business every day. Well, companies figured out they wanted to analyze that data. So in order to do that, we pulled all this data out with ETL, loaded it into a relational data warehouse, and then did the analysis on that. Actually, you'd build OLAP cubes on top of the warehouse and do the analysis on those because they're smaller and faster and more performant. So that's what we did. Well, over the years, you can imagine, as data warehousing took off and became popular, there were more and more demands for more and more data. So more business people got into the picture. They wanted their data as well. They wanted new sets of data. They wanted to do the analysis as other folks were doing. So what you had is this just incremental increase in the workload, in the weight load, if you will, for all the engineers who had to hit these batch windows to get data in there. Well, one of the challenges is that there was never any strategic view of the data. So you had all these batches coming across the transom every single day, usually overnight, and to keep the business users happy. But there's a ton of redundancy in there. And also, way back in the day, we had to strip out all the context in order to get the data into these systems through small pipes to get to slow processors and do the analysis. Well, things have changed dramatically since then, I have to tell you. So even 10 years ago, there was a lot of innovation in the data integration space, but the last 5 years, I'm going to argue we have seen tremendous innovation. Part of that is because of open source, because open source technology climbed up the stack. It's not just the OS anymore, like Linux or Kubernetes, which is arguably the operating system of the cloud. Not just there, but in the data space, we have a lot of open source technology. Spark and Kafka come out of the Apache Foundation. Kafka, of course, is the engine that ran LinkedIn. Spark was a really brilliant product that came out. So it's basically a processing engine for high-speed batch, micro batch, really, ETL and other use cases. And now we have a whole bunch of different companies that are really sitting on top of that wave of innovation and fundamentally transforming how business gets done. And folks, I'm very excited to have Nir Libna on the show from Equalum. Very, very cool company doing that exact kind of work. We're also going to hear from my longtime buddy, Rick Sherman. I call him the busiest consultant in the world from Athena IT Solutions. And Eugene Burke is joining us as well from up in Pennsylvania. And with that, let's throw it over to Nir Libna of Equalum. Nir, tell us a bit about yourself and where you came up with this idea and how you folks managed to build this engine in a pretty short period of time.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Eric, again. My name is Nir. I'm the CEO, founder of a company called Equalum. I've been hands-on in the business of big data for about 20 years. I've done a lot of consulting in my fair share of time, and I spent time building about 600 environments over my life before transitioning into product roles, led some of the popular products of a company called Quest Software, Foglight Performance Analysis, some other products as well, and eventually started, this journey in the last 5 years. In regards to Equalum, we are what I call a CDC-powered multi-model data integration platform, and the idea is, you talked about this. The ETL world and data movement world in general is getting more and more complicated because there's so many parameters changing. First, obviously, volumes of data, that's a given, right? But there are more problems becoming apparent because data velocity, we're talking about, latencies, real-time aspects, streaming the data, whether it's due to volumes or due to the use cases or just wanting to see your data fresh. I think the analytical requirements are also kind of getting into a more complicated status. They're also becoming part of the organization. It's no longer a one-off project that sits out there and maybe provides bonus for the organization. It's literally part of the day-to-day business. So I think data movement becomes complicated because all these things are getting complicated. On the other hand, the data sits in the same systems, the legacy systems sitting there for 50 years. So now, instead of trying to get some data every now and then from your SAP into this, yearly BI analysis, now you're forced to do real-time streaming from your SAP, or something that is much more complicated. The volumes of data obviously boom. So that's kind of why we started this. We said, okay, how do we bridge this big gap that is being created? You talked about Spark, you talked about a lot of very cool technologies coming out to the world to try to solve some of these problems, volumes, latencies and whatnot. But the challenges are still there. How do you actually get the data from the systems? How do you actually, do you start coding because you're now suddenly working on these open source frameworks? How do you provide enterprise requirement on something that was developed by the community? So it's a great framework, but doesn't have the needs. And we sought out, because of all these challenges, to really bring a platform that solves all these together by bridging that using CDC change data capture approach from the sources to extract data in real time incrementally, while allowing a full scale out no coding experience on top of open source technologies, basically.
Yeah, and that's such a clever move, I have to say, because one of the best parts about open source is that it allowed us to build a larger and broader foundation. Because what was happening hitherto in the closed source world was a whole heck of a lot of reinventing the wheel, right? And so you had all of these vendors all reinventing wheels in different ways, and no doubt they came up with some innovative stuff. But if you can agree on the foundation, then you can start building and becoming much more focused and precise about what you're trying to accomplish. And if you're talking about data ingest at the scale that companies need these days, that's a really big deal. And that really, it opens the door for everything else we talk about on this show, which is analytics, which is artificial intelligence, machine learning. All this next generation innovation comes as a result of getting data where it needs to be, right, Nir?
Yeah, exactly. It's the enabler. Think of it as the pipes, that are driving everything. The same pipes you have in your house with water running. Every time you open the faucet, you're expecting data to be there and be there immediately. So it's kind of the same story here. We're building the right infrastructure to serve analytics to become embedded within the business itself. So it's going to be everywhere, and every aspect of the business is going to leverage that, and therefore you need to be able to handle those evolving changes and needs over time. But you're still stuck with the challenges of a very old sort of IT that sits there for 50 years.
I just love the creativity that we see in our world. And as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And so when you have to change something, you're going to find a way to change it. And I think what we've seen now in this particular last year of our lives is that COVID was the ultimate forcing function. It forced us to change. It forced us to look at new ways of doing things. And I think it's been very good for some companies that were positioned to take advantage of that situation. I mean, I had one guy, Carl Hightower, the CDO of Novant Health, on our show, I think in October maybe, or September, and he said that they tackled 5 years of digital transformation roadmap in 5 months because of COVID. So that goes to show you what can be done if people really focus on getting stuff done. But what do you think about CDC coming back in such fashion, Rick?
Yeah, so the catchphrase "What's old is new again."
Yeah.
I mean, lots of the stuff. I have been around a while, and a lot of the things we did before, and you mentioned about having to be efficient coders. That's one of the things that has never left me. Whereas the people now are so sloppy because they got all these extra resources to use. But yeah, change data capture, I agree, is the key. I think one of the things that first off, also that data integration, ironically, has always been the most stovepipe activity in enterprise going. I mean, it's never coordinated. It's always on a project by process basis, and so it usually creates more stovepipes. But the thing with CDC and what we've been talking about is, I think we have lots of different integration use cases, streaming, the higher volumes, replication. When it first came on board, it was just simply a dumb technology. It was just moving data to move data, and you'd use Python or some other code to do something with it. So the whole idea of putting on change data capture and enabling transformations, I think, is one of the keys in the evolution, the emerging aspects of using this kind of technology to really do data integration and not just data movement. Nir, just you mentioned before, CDC way back when was just to copy data, and a lot of the first generation pipeline tools, that's really what they did, is they just moved data, and it's integration, it's not just movement. So that's why it's refreshing, not only the product, but how you've architected it and moved it across, in that you need the volume, but you still need the integration. Change data capture is one of the key things that, regardless of whether it's a legacy ETL tool or a pipeline tool, a data prep tool, most people don't understand. So embedding it in the product so it can do it for you is a leap forward, because otherwise programmers don't know how to do it right. By any means. Most source systems don't necessarily keep track of history or the changes in the data very well. So if you have an effective change data capture, pulling it in a pipeline, then you can actually enhance the data by keeping track of the history where it wasn't even in the source system. I think that's another breakthrough when you're trying to do effective change data capture. If you're really doing analytics, you really do need to know how things changed. And enterprise apps, cloud apps, whatever you're using, their goal is to do a business process or manage an event. It isn't necessarily to track the history. So this change data capture enables you to do that. And I think that's also key, because when you get into analytics, you absolutely need to know that data, to have that history. Even if it's what happened in the last 5 minutes, I don't mean 2 years ago, but what happened just recently in the campaign that you're running. Or we had one of our customers, contract biologics firms, that's doing the COVID vaccine, and they're having all sorts of sensors around the process to manufacture, viscosity, temperature, all sorts of things, and they're doing their real time, and they need the same kind of deal. They need to know what changed. So it's not just it's not just big sales stuff. It's life and death stuff now in all sorts of industries. Financial transactions, of course, were a key area and for using this kind of technology, but it's way beyond that now. And so it's excellent to be able to do that.
We're talking all about data integration at scale, and in the commercial break there, we were all chatting, and Nir Libna of Equalum busted out one of the funniest lines I've ever heard. He said that their technology is an excuse cleaning machine. Nir, I'd like you to comment on that. Explain that for our audience. What do you mean when you say that Equalum is an excuse cleaning machine?
Yeah, I was referring to this when Eugene, asked me, how easy it is to roll out. It's essentially about adaptability. You talk about technology and how things are, cutting edge, Spark, all these crazy technologies. But at the end of the day, it doesn't help the person that sits in the organization. They have these amazing open source technologies they cannot use. They have these legacy systems they cannot connect to because honestly, it's just not as easy. And there's a bunch of excuses around it. Security, don't touch my system, overhead. So many reasons for that IT guy not to innovate, honestly, because he's like, he has more risks than opportunity. And therefore, what we do is we are called, a lot of times, analysts refer to us as a bridging technology. We bridge between that legacy experience, those excuses, that kind of mindset, with the new world of analytics and business value by providing something that is adoptable. And the key for Equalum, we in 1 week will go to a Fortune 100 company, and with all the excuses, with all the stories, with all the complications, we will be able to deliver value within a week. And we've done that in some of the biggest Fortune 100 companies in the world. So that's the excuse cleaning, because it's not just technology. It's not just about cutting edge. It's about adaptability. You're forcing an organization to make something. And if it's too big of a change, they just won't do it.
Yeah, that's a really great line. And, I'll bring Rick back in quickly, and then we'll bring in Eugene Burke from Clarivate, who's on the call as well today. But Rick, that I came across, it's always in the pre-show that we had the fun revelations, but there was a pre-show maybe like a month or two ago where someone made this line that just cracked me up. He said, yeah, well, there's an old aphorism in IT that says just one layer of abstraction can solve all our problems. And what's interesting is that Nir is talking about that, right? Because we're seeing this across the industry in lots of different ways, which tells me it's a significant trend. It's like a mega trend. But if you can leave the systems the way they are and leave their data the way it is until it has to be changed, of course, and you can manage in this layer of abstraction all the other orchestration that you want done, you just solve that problem. Now you can work in this scale out environment and make the changes that are necessary, and it'll reach in and touch whatever system it needs to as it needs to do it. But the key is moving away from that old mindset of huge chunks of data being thrown in batch over the transom and then come back the other way, which caused quality problems. It caused batch window problems. It caused a lot of frustration too. I mean, end user morale to me is the number one most important characteristic of any company. What is your morale like? And if you have good systems and good processes and you don't suffer from the excuse syndrome, you're going to have high morale. But what do you think about all that, Rick?
Yeah, I agree with it. I think coupling along with that is the fact that integration. You mentioned about what integration used to be. It also was a one-way pipeline. It's just shoveling the stuff into a warehouse or into something to do reporting off of. But now it's application integration. It's integrating the different business processes. If you're going to make a decision, it isn't like move it into an Excel spreadsheet and we'll make a decision. It's like the data comes from one system, needs to be transformed, go to another system, and then another system. It's application integration now, not just decision management, the old buzzword they used to use. So that's synchronizing between it. And in the old days, which wasn't all that long ago, maybe last week, we were still splitting. The idea of application integration was mainly this code-driven stuff. And then we had data integration, but the idea of putting it together in this sort of change data capture, data transformation, and being able to move data between places is how you make decisions. It's how you move data and transform data so it can be used by, whether it's making a vaccine, whether it's managing a power grid. Mm-hmm. Whether it's doing financial transactions spread across the world, which we've worked for many of those firms too. So a lot of this has to do is we move beyond just a single pipe. We've moved into change data capture. I love the idea, and it's more than overdue, of getting no coding and the intelligence into the transformations. Right, a lot of the legacy ETL out there is terrible because they're forgetting about the fact that the technology is older. The fact is that 80% of what's done in those tools is SQL code, right? They're not even taking advantage of the state of the tool when they use the tool. They're just using SQL. And the first data pipelines just used a lot of Python. So moving forward beyond that is really what we got to do. Otherwise, the new generation data integration will have its own excuse cleansing system, right? So that's one of the key things that we need that is moving through, and I think last year helped out a lot in that way, because there was a lot more attention related to data integration and what data is. But I think it keeps evolving, because I think people realize just moving data someplace isn't enough. And we put a lot into it. Now we really need to integrate data, and we need to integrate business processes, data events, and be able to make decisions based on that. Decisions aren't just at the end by an executive. It's somebody doing lots of different things in an enterprise or with their customers or between enterprises.
It's actually a perfect segue to bring in Eugene Burke, our practitioner. He's client side. So we have the whole spectrum here, folks. We have Nir as the technologist. We've got Rick as the consultant. Eugene's the client side, and I'm the outsider as the analyst / host. So we've covered all 4 major bases on the show today. And with that, Eugene Burke, tell us a bit about yourself and what you want to learn about data integration at scale today from our friend Nir Libna of Equalum.
So I'll bring you a little bit of pain from the delivery side. So Nir, I'll tell you about a project that I finished up at a large bank, and it was for regulatory compliance. It was must, succeed in order to get the Fed off our backs. And at the end of the project, we brought this list of tables and sources that we had acquired, and we got that kind of dead pause. Like at the end of this meeting, we got you didn't get this, and you didn't get this, and you didn't get this, you didn't get this. One of those sources. And so a day in the life kind of story would be interesting, because we had to extend the project and acquire 6 systems additional data. And what we did was we just did table copy, right? We did it as quick and as dirty as we possibly could just to go out and get the data. And I was looking at Erez's demo, and I thought this would have been really, really good to have, to be able to point and shoot and just get what we need and get it quickly. So any day in the life organizational agility stories where having no code, being able to point and shoot at the data very, very quickly we're talking about adding value within a week.
Yeah, it's I love the projects of that sort, because this is the I don't go to jail project. I love those because it's like, okay, you either do it or you go to jail. That's your really the options. And it's funny because it used to be where you could sort of comply within 6 months or within a year to whatever probe coming from the FBI or IRS or whatever. Now it's like you need some sort of real-time compliance. You can no longer kind of sit and in 6 months we'll kind of worry about what we've done here. It just doesn't work that way anymore. You kind of need to ensure that you're kind of connected to your system all the time. And high level speaking, this is exactly what I'm talking about. That infrastructure that allows you to stream or bring data from any source at any given time using a very simplified way of doing things is kind of the key to that. Because if you're not doing that, then you're really stuck. And even even if it's not regulatory, Rick talked about application integration, which to some extent kind of correlates. It's not the same use case, but we've done something with one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world about clinical trials and application integration in that regards, and all that stuff, and being able to connect those systems in real time, get to all the sources. When there is no specific source, then you use REST APIs, you use other APIs. There's tons of ways to get to the source if you know them. And I think one of the things we pride ourselves is being a one-stop shop for, I don't want you to buy 6 tools. That's exactly what I'm against, because I think, it becomes a problem. How do you manage those? How do you integrate those into your monitoring systems? How do you comply with everything together? It just becomes a big, big problem. I think that at the end of the day, our data infrastructure needs to be a lot more robust today to handle those use cases, and it needs to be quick. Productivity, no coding, but get the flexibility. You can still code if you want, but generally speaking, if your analyst now wants to get a compliance report done, from all these sources, no coding experience has to be there. We still need that drag and drop Informatica sort of few steps. Okay, get me the data to where I want and move from there. Heck, we might even want to skip the data warehouse and just show report immediately and feed real-time reports. So there's tons of ways to do this, but you need a very robust infrastructure. Once you have that in place, once there's no productivity problem, you solve the scalability issues, you solve the variety of sources issues, which is honestly, you know, it's not enough talked about, and you touched on that. Every time there's a new source, it's like, how do I even get to that source? You know, what's the way? It's like security challenges. How do I get the data in real time from there? CDC, you know, people think of CDC as database CDC. It's just, you know, that's the way history worked. What about CDC from your SAP or your Salesforce or your web services or your files? You know, there's so many places where you need to be able to extract data in real time. And I think, you know, we tend to refer to CDC not just as an Oracle CDC sort of mechanic. We can bring data from your SAP or web services or anything that you have, because CDC is a method, like it's a method more than anything. It's not just a technology, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, good old-fashioned basics, right? I'll throw it over to Rick for some closing comments here, Rick. You know, you've been around, as we've discussed, for a number of years, and so you've kind of lived through the old days of doing things. And I think that nowadays the biggest lag is just going to be end user uptake, meaning fear of the old ways, fear of being burned in different ways, whether it's, you know, because a company gets acquired or it goes out of business or whatever. There are lots of different threats out there. But to me, it's really the mindset and changing the mindset and helping people realize that they don't have to suffer with the old technologies anymore, right, Rick?
Yeah, I think that's key, and I think in a couple areas. One is, and I mentioned earlier about lots of legacy ETL was really SQL code, and that really had to do with the fact that the developers didn't embrace the new technology or even understood the concepts, right? So their go-to-market was, let's just write SQL, and we'll have Informatica or Ab Initio or, you know, Data Stage run it. Well, that wasn't using the tool. So that is one of the key things is I think the newest generation using your tools and comparable tools is to, one, understand what your tool can do, and then leverage it and not go back to coding or not go back. You also mentioned that, and I think it's key, you know, there's hybrid data integration, right? And people are used to doing piece parts. They're comfortable with this, so they'll put it together. So having the platform that can do it for them is key. And another thing which we didn't mention this session, but I think is important too, is the data ops that you provide. I mean, that's one of the key things that I think has emerged. It has been the fact that it isn't just running that code and whether it fails or not. It isn't just streaming it in and hoping that you got the right stuff. I mean, the data ops and to be able to run it is also, I think, a key difference from the old days, and I think it's certainly one of the key pieces of value for integration. So, and I know you guys address that, and I think that's a key thing too. So adoption and having the old guard not changing their mindset, and also getting done for that old guard to understand the data ops is critical to their success and to their company's success.
Yeah, and I love that excuse cleaner. I'm gonna be tweeting about that after the show.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really funny, but it's an excellent point, right? So there are all these old fears that are baked into old ways of doing business and older technologies, and it's understandable. I mean, people get burned. Once bitten, twice shy, right? It's the old joke: a cat won't jump on a hot stove twice, right? Because it jumps up and it's like, it's never to go there again. The cats learn. Lots of animals learn, but these days, because there are just such tremendous advances in the technology, and that's really the key, folks, and it's in the title of the show, At Scale. The fact that we have these scale-out architectures now, which can scale up and scale down. We've been working on that stuff for decades. Like 25, 30 years ago, some of the best innovation in e-commerce was built around trying to scale up to handle peak demand on Black Friday and then scale back down. Scale up is real easy, or relatively easy. Scaling down can be a bit harder. But folks, thanks so much for listening. You've been listening to DM Radio.